Hello, physical body of multiple sclerosis patient here. I just bring a little mushroom lamp over here to make it easier to show. Um, this is not a good place to record, but anyway. Let's hold this mushroom lamp. I'll record. So I'm going to put a link at the bottom of this video to a video by, I already forgot his name. He's a doctor who was referring to some research between EBV and something called alpha crystalline, the alpha crystalline protein. Okay, so watch that guy's video to get some clarification. As anyone would know, multiple sclerosis is an example of an area of research that involves several very complicated biological systems and their interactions. So it's not surprising that the research into multiple sclerosis has taken quite some time and involves enormous amounts of specialty. And to this day, patients aren't necessarily getting the treatment that they need due to the symptoms being capable of mimicking other things, including areas like mental health. Without further ado, let's look at some opinions that this physical body has on the subject. A different short will show you that a person was pointing out that Epstein-Barr virus has been linked to several different illnesses that are associated with autoimmune conditions. Multiple sclerosis is just one of them. Others include might include things like irritable bowel syndrome. So let's look at about why proteins are important more generally, and why proteins are not necessarily the same thing as dairy. However, looking at the dairy theory of multiple sclerosis is likely to yield some results, but and to try to explain why dairy is not on its own able to give you multiple sclerosis, and why the Epstein-Barr virus is also not on its own able to give you multiple sclerosis. Those are questions that you need to answer, because sometimes when people point out things like the Epstein-Barr virus can give you multiple sclerosis, and they go, but everyone's got it, 98% of the population might actually have contracted it already, they start to freak out when they don't need to. So let's have a look at what might be going on there. So in multiple sclerosis patients, you're talking about a clusterfuck illness where more than one thing is likely to have gone wrong in the individual's biological systems to lead to that particular outcome. And if you don't actually have all of those variables, then you won't get multiple sclerosis, but you could get something else. So in the case of the Epstein-Barr virus, it is probably going to increase the probability of autoimmune disease more generally, but which autoimmune disease you get will vary depending on the other cluster of symptoms or issues that you may or may not have over the course of your life. Subsequently, it's possible that type 2 diabetes could also be contributed to by the Epstein-Barr virus. HIV, certain pancreatic cells are targeted that are associated with insulin, for example. Now, how that might come about, of course, is HIV pancreatic fat cells are targeted. Now, the fat cell theory is going to become important in a moment, because the fat cell theory links you to several different illnesses. One is multiple sclerosis. Another one is might be Sjogren's syndrome. I'm not quite sure. Sjogren's syndrome is a DX in multiple sclerosis, like an alternative DX in MS as well. So depending on your symptoms, that might be. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, to clarify what multiple sclerosis happens in multiple sclerosis, like the man said, it's your immune system is supposed to target a nasty pasty, but then it goes a bit crazy and it goes after a normal body cell. In the case of multiple sclerosis, it's a fat cell associated with the brain called the myelin sheath that results in shearing of the neurons, protective layer, similar to like the plastic that you find on the wires for like the those little USB cables that you use to charge things like that. They have a little plastic sheath over it. Okay, pretend that was made from fat cells instead, called myelin, and that was your brain cell. Okay, what happens is the immune system is attacking that plastic, that sheath there, and it makes the wires in the brain go a bit ugh, and things don't work so well. So even when the brain's not inflamed through like the inflammatory process, if there's damage to those nerve cells, it means those nerve cells don't always work properly. So a person can exhibit multiple sclerosis symptoms without actually being in a relapse phase of active lesions because they've already had prior damage. So excuse the ums and the ahs and the occasional slurring. Here we go. Okay. With that, the fat cells become very important. So, for this physical body, the actual medical history involves things like a casein intolerance. So not every multiple sclerosis patient or diabetes patient, by the way, don't have diabetes, but just referring to it as a potential place to look for these ideas. If you have if you have Epstein-Barr and you have dairy intolerance, you don't necessarily get MS, because there are people who have both but don't have MS. There are people who have Epstein-Barr but don't have MS. There are people who have dairy intolerance who don't have MS, and there are people who have both who have MS. So there are other factors at work that contribute to whether or not that disease process leads to the MS outcome. So how you get to the point where those proteins that he's talking about become cross-reactive, as he described it, is going to vary considerably. Epstein-Barr virus is a good place to look because it is a virus that's known to lay dormant in the central nervous system in some patients over the course of a lifetime, and may be involved, according to some research, haven't actually found it, but did look at it a long time ago, which suggests that it might be capable of being involved in misprogramming the immune system more generally. So if you're someone with a casein intolerance, such as this physical body here, now casein is the fat found in cow's milk. No cheese and no butter and no cheesecake and no chocolate cake and no birthday cake. Can't have birthday cake. It's no fair. It really sucks too when your sister's like the best birthday cake maker in the world, but you can't eat it. Can we just have a sook for a minute? We're just going to have a sook for a minute. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Anyway, so if your sister's the best birthday cake maker in the world, then you probably wouldn't get to eat her cake. So, in someone like this physical body who was casein intolerant their entire life, but only found out, interestingly enough, a year before the multiple sclerosis got diagnosed. So, in the case of the casein intolerance, it contributed to the following symptoms: eczema, chronic, pretty bad, or right through the elbows and the back of the knees, really bad eczema, irritable bowel syndrome, and attention deficit disorder. All of those symptoms were tested. This is before the MS got diagnosed. So the general practitioner had said, yeah, it seems like you might be casein intolerant. And the reaction was, bullshit, cheesecake is yummy, get stuffed. And naturally, all the science stuff came out. And that included what's called a response inhibition test. So there was a free test available online so that the patient or the person doing the test didn't determine how the test was written. It was randomized and controlled by a computer program. So a response inhibition test was done. Measurement of the eczema was done, and yes, poo measurements were done in a ABA model test. So 2 weeks consuming dairy, 4 weeks without dairy, to include for 2 weeks where the antibodies that may or may not have been made towards casein were being tested, as well as 2 weeks in the clear, followed by 2 weeks consuming dairy again. And that was done a long time ago now. And the results clearly showed that attention deficit symptoms as on the response inhibition test improved. The eczema was gone completely, and the irritable bowel syndrome, as in the poos, were much, much better. So by the end of that 6 weeks, a surprise happened, and all the paperwork from the statistics was done, and standard psychological statistics were stuck on the GP's table, and the GP was told, you were definitely right about that one, and wow, I don't have ADD, have a dairy allergy, no fucking way. And the GP's response was, if you really had ADD, you probably wouldn't have been able to stick to that project. Sorry, no offense to people with ADD. Oh, okay. So, of course, at that point in life, the casein intolerance being treated seemed like the panacea to all of life's problems. It was absolutely a wonderful experience with this physical body to go, well, the easiest thing to do is to avoid cheesecake. It's really not that great. It's better to avoid cheesecake than to be scratching at 2 o'clock in the morning. It really is. So that's what's happened there. Unfortunately, the multiple sclerosis symptoms, as often happens with MS patients, had started a couple of years before the diagnosis of the dairy intolerance. So a couple of years after the dairy intolerance was diagnosed, the multiple sclerosis was diagnosed, and it was not fun. Okay, but when someone gets to the point where they get a relapse bad enough to be diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, it's a pretty bad relapse. So it wasn't any good. Fortunately, however, because the casein intolerance had been diagnosed before the MS, there was some tinkering going. There was some when the brain fog wasn't too bad. There was a little bit of tinkering going on. Fat. It's got something to do with the fat. Okay, so when that was happening, there was some ideas floating about. Okay, is it possible that the Epstein-Barr virus somehow miscodes the antibodies so that it leads to the dairy intolerance? And if so, if the dairy intolerance isn't treated for long enough, can it lead to miscoding of the antibodies so that the myelin sheath starts to get disrupted? And so the answer, of course, then was, you're never consuming dairy again. Absolutely never. That is just no. Okay, it was absolutely set. There's going to be no dairy after that. Okay, so by that point, it's not enough to actually what's the word? Well, the rot had set in, basically. So the choices had to revolve around taking omega-3 fatty acids, iron supplements, vitamin D tablets and stuff like that, because the other thing too is the vitamin D deficiency issue. They also reckon people who live more than 20 kilometres away, 20 degrees latitude away from the equator before the age of 15 are more likely to have vitamin D deficiency, which contributes. They also reckon that you have to contract the Epstein-Barr virus between the ages of 15 and 25 to contribute. So you have to develop mono for the Epstein-Barr virus to hang around your central nervous system and cause those problems. So when they say multiple sclerosis when I was saying that multiple sclerosis is the result of a clusterfuck, it really is the result of a clusterfuck. You can't just get Epstein-Barr virus and suddenly you'll get multiple sclerosis. You can't just be allergic to dairy and suddenly get multiple sclerosis. You have to get the Epstein-Barr virus between the ages of 15 to 25. You have to live more than 20 degrees latitude away from the equator. You also have to have untreated dairy intolerance that resulted in severe immune reactions such as continuous eczema and IBS and possibly attention deficit symptoms. You have to have more than one symptom as well. As you can see, with the dairy intolerance affecting more than one system by having a skin disorder as well as a bowel disorder and attention deficit, it meant that the dairy intolerance was affecting more than one system, and it was a genuine immunological problem. And it was, moreover, an immunological problem that had contributed to a brain problem. So, without further ado, yes, the researchers absolutely should research the link between Epstein-Barr virus and fat cells. There is no reason why they should not. It is an important area of research, and it likely affects more than one autoimmune disease in the world. And sorting out the Epstein-Barr virus is going to be a wonderful thing for humanity, considering it did spread through colonization, it did spread during the Industrial Revolution, and also the last piece of research that I've contributed to for the treatment of my own illness is the pronoun you. So the videos that are available with regards to the pronoun you and how that relates to sort of the mind link about how pronouns can sometimes confuse people, and about how you probably find multiple sclerosis is more common amongst Anglophone people than not, for reasons not just associated with distance from the equator, but also associated with imperial colonization behaviour. And as for Scandinavian populations that have it, those Scandinavian populations do have Germanic languages, and the word "you" has its origin in German. So, but how it became an English pronoun for the second person subject rather than third person object does relate to imperial activities directly when it comes to the English aristocracy in the late 1450s or thereabouts, around the time of King James II, following the Tudor dynasty, and their ruling that the plebeians shall be referred to as YOU and the aristocracy as VOUS, which was in direct contradiction to previous English pronouns, which included thee, thou, and thine. So without further ado, don't freak out. Multiple sclerosis is still very, very rare. It's going to stay rare. However, the research into the link between Epstein-Barr virus and fat cells and pronouns and associated activities is going to yield great results for humanity if done effectively. Have a nice day.